Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Library of Chaos podcast, a podcast reviewing Black Library's Warhammer 40k stories. I'm Wozni.
I'm Jimbus.
And I'm Obrim.
Alright. Jimbus and I have been into 40k for quite a while. We've dived quite deep into the lore and the literature, while Obrim's a bit more green to it.
Yeah, I've basically only read Horus Heresy in the past. I've played some good video games, some of the 40k Dawn of War games, stuff like that. Other than that,
So basically, you're a filthy casual.
A secondary. Alright. Well, we want to have a look at these books. We want to review them critically. We want to make sure we're judging them for the quality of the stories and also the value they add to the setting and what sort of impact they have. Because it feels like something we want to have our own go at.
Alrighty. We're beginning our podcast at the beginning of Black Library itself, all the way back in 1999. The year which felt like a continuous party, in which it feels like that was the pinnacle of our civilization, according to the Matrix at any rate. And that was the year that Black Library, the imprint of Games Workshop PLC, published their first novel. The first novel we're going to be talking about today, First and Only by Dan Abnett. The beginning of what will become a long and sprawling series of novels and shorts about Ibram Gaunt and the Tanith Ghosts, a regiment in the Imperial Guard.
Yep, we're going to have a set of novels we're looking at, which are now sold under the omnibus The Founding, and one more story. So we've got First and Only. We'll also be looking at the story A Ghost Return, and another short story called Of Their Lives in the Ruins of Their Cities. These were released a little bit later, but they've been collected in omnibuses and such, and sort of lined up in their own position in the narrative order now. So we're going to have A Ghost Return.
I like how you say a little bit later, because they were published a full decade afterwards.
Yeah,
and that really
just like 10, 15 years later. We'll have A Ghost Return. We'll have A Ghost Return, we'll have First and Only, we'll have Of Their Lives in the Ruins of Their Cities. We then have two more novels, Ghostmaker and Necropolis, and then the short stories In Remembrance and Vermilion Level, which is actually it's a weird one. We'll get to that when we get to it.
it really surprises me that they started with Dan Abnett. Like, Dan Abnett is clearly a standout author in the Horus Heresy series as well, so they started well at least.
He's a standout author in general. He's the biggest name Black Library have ever been able to get there, because he does far more than just 40k. He's made a big name for himself in the sphere in general. I'll actually be talking about that later on. There's some things I want to bring up in Necropolis about his previous work and how it ties into it.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. All right, well, should we... do we have any... Before we get into them too much, because I want to have like a point where we stop for spoilers, do we have any general comments on the books and things we like or didn't like overall, or anything we want to talk about? I guess one thing I want to say is, generally, I am not very interested in Imperial Guard type things, and in spite of that, I've found these books quite gripping. I noticed a few common themes, I think, along these. One of them I'm going to call managing information, which I quite like. Yeah, like a lot of books, you discover things along with the characters. You're kind of side by side with the characters. You learn what they learn, and that's how you progress and like you catch up with what's happening in the story. You can come to conclusions at the same time the character does. But with these stories, one thing that happens in a lot of the stories is somebody will know something. You will know that they know something, but you don't know what they know. So your knowledge is not mirroring the main characters. I find that quite often like that's a really big point of intrigue in the stories.
There's some huge sections of that, and I feel like Abnett does that in both good and bad ways, depending on what the situation is. A lot of books that do this are usually criticized for it, because if you can't come to the same conclusion that the main characters can, and then they suddenly reveal it as if it's like this major deduction of the main character, it often feels false as an advancement by the main character. But like in this case, it's obviously done on purpose, and in some cases it works very well. There's a few cases I thought it was a bit questionable, but it's good in general. I really like that aspect as well.
I think that's often bad when you don't know that they know it, and then it's just revealed, and it just feels like a bit of a Deus Ex Machina. But the way Abnett's done it in these books, you know that they know something you don't know. So it's not a point of, oh, well, okay, he just knew that all along. Instead, it's a point of, what does he know?
yeah, what is that piece of information that is making him causing this decision to make sense in the grand scheme that we aren't aware of yet?
That's something, of course, that will come up a lot more in his Inquisitor books.
Yes, yeah, I think Eisenhorn. I should probably make clear I have read both the 3 Gaunt Ghost books that we're going to be discussing today, and I've read the 3 Eisenhorn books as of today. Going into this,
we'll get there. Eventually, we'll get there.
Another thing I want to say is, First and Only, I don't believe it was designed to be this is a book that you can read if you're into 40k. I'm pretty sure it was designed as something to bring people into 40k, like something that was supposed to go and sit on the shelf in a regular bookstore and have people go, "Oh, what's that?" and pick it up. It's it doesn't have a lot of specialist knowledge that, to what extent it does, you can still understand and enjoy the book. You pick up on it as you read, I think. And it's also definitely designed to be a standalone book rather than it needs to be part of a series.
I think I agree with that.
I would say that First and Only being the first Black Library book, and also coming at a point where a lot of the fluff, the background text for Warhammer 40,000 still wasn't set in stone, and Dan Abnett actually ended up creating a fair chunk of it. There's a few bits and pieces there that I think he put in that would later be effectively canonized as the lore.
Yeah, I guess I have some questions about that will come up a lot later on, because there's a lot of aspects to these books, and I noticed with Eisenhorn as well, and stuff in the Horus Heresy, that Dan Abnett seems to throw out some very quite world-changing events and things and items, and these, if these are canon, then it feels like they add a lot to the world.
Abnett is very big on doing that. He's quite brave with I want to just add something to the setting. He doesn't shy away from it. In some stories, I think people get quite annoyed at that when something that they view as a sacred cow gets touched by Abnett.
Well, some of the things he does are questionable, but of course that is something. There's a talk for another day.
Well, I think we probably don't have too many of them here. I don't think he does anything too controversial in these books.
Certainly not. He's very early.
There's one or two things which I found quite interesting, but we'll get to that. Maybe there is context for this stuff that I'm just missing. That's the interesting part here, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I've just remembered something I really wanted to raise. I picked up the version of First and Only that I reread for this was a 20th anniversary edition, and it has a foreword in the book by Abnett. In this foreword, he spoils a big event from the second omnibus. So if you are new to the Gaunt Ghost series and you pick up the 20th anniversary edition, skip over Abnett's foreword. Do not read it. I want to get that out there.
This is our PSA for the episode. There'll be one every episode.
Oh no.
I appreciate you telling me that as well in advance, because I did look at the book and I saw the foreword and I was like, well, wait. Oh, I remember wasn't you mentioning this. I'll avoid that.
Yeah. Do we have any other thoughts on these first few books?
I guess really all I wanted to say there was that the story feels a little bit, I guess, non-traditional in structure. It's a bit temporally. It's back and forth. Jumps around a lot.
There's a lot of flashbacks.
There are a lot of flashbacks.
I kind of like the structure of it. It feels very... You've got a narrative, which is set over different stories, but there's still a clear narrative going on. And there's also there's a secondary thing going on where we can actually see what's happening behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, though, because I read all three of them, and I read the short stories, and then I reread the 3 books again, just to make sure that I understood, I'd could, and got everything clear in the order it happens. And I felt like the first book made a lot more sense going back to it, and that is, I don't know whether that's just because I've already read that book once, or whether because I had the background information from the other books as well. And I think it was probably partly because of the background information from the other books. So I'm not sure I entirely agree that it is a perfect standalone. I feel like there's aspects to it that work better if you have a background knowledge of other things in the 40k world, which you don't get from that book.
Well, I think, well, one thing there, I guess, to note is Ghostmaker is basically a set of character studies. So if you read Ghostmaker and then you go back to First and Only, you're now rereading it after having read character studies on all the characters in the book. So I guess it is a bit of a different read, reading it again.
Yeah, no, definitely. The characters that are in Ghostmaker, and well, it's kind of funny because obviously the characters that are in the later books are not going to die, so that's obviously a huge aspect. But there are definitely main characters. Abnett does this a lot. He has his main characters, and then he has his maybe side main characters. And the side main characters, you never really know whether they're going to die. They're probably the ones where you've got to watch out for. The main characters, it seems like almost anything can happen to them, and they're fine. They're good. They're golden.
Okay, that's fair, I guess. Yeah. So
at least I found out with Gaunt's Ghosts.
Yeah, fair enough. Especially, I guess, since in the first book you don't necessarily know who's going to be a main character or not yet, in that sense.
Yes. Well, that's the interesting thing going back. As I said, like you aren't entirely sure at that point who is going to be at risk. So that's like the one book where you're sort of questioning: is this person going to die? Are they going to die now? And there are quite a few scenes in the first book, obviously like that dramatic scenes where you're like, oh what's going to happen?
Yeah.
I feel like maybe that's going to become a problem later on, then further into the series, if these characters are fixed in stone as completely immortal.
Well, we'll get to that when we get to that, I think, as we get further in the books. Ghostmaker, I mentioned it was it's a lot of stories that are character studies, and I've heard it said quite a lot. I've heard it said all of the stories in Ghostmaker, except the last one, used to be in Inferno magazines. And I looked this up, and there's a Gaunt Ghost wiki, which tells you that all of these stories were in Inferno magazines. And I did some more digging, and as far as I can tell, only 3 of the stories in Ghostmaker were actually in Inferno magazine, as best as I can tell. I thought that was interesting.
So there's how many character studies are there in that? There's at least 4, but there's also a story that ties it all together, isn't there?
Yes, I would say there's possibly I'd probably say 8 character studies. I would say 8.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly
7.
Which ones.
We'll get into that.
Obviously
there's into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that when they get into that. But there are introductions, and there's sort of like tie-in stories that go in between the character studies, and it's not.
Yeah,
I can feel like some of those would fit very well on their own, and some of them wouldn't so much, which is probably why some of them are in the magazine and others are not.
It's worth noting as well, with that in mind, those 3 stories were written in 1997 and 1998, I think. So the first Gaunt's Ghost stuff was before Black Library, is 3 of the short stories from Ghostmaker.
And they would then have been before First and Only, right?
Yes.
See,
Jimbus may be able to correct
so
me
much
on
sense.
that history when we get into the detail. That being said, I don't think we have much more to talk about of Ghostmaker. Do we have anything we want to say about Necropolis?
I remember you in the past telling me that this felt like the first more traditional story, at least.
Necropolis does feel like the first solid story. Like, it's the first of the novels there's actually one story of one event happening. It's about the Gaunt's Ghost, the Tanith first, actually setting down to help defend a hive. And it's not really from the Tanith perspective so much as from the Imperial side. And I quite like it. You've got a lot of characters, you've got a lot of moving parts, but it all ties together really well. Every moving part feels quite easy to follow, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It covers a lot of different aspects of Imperial Guard operations, I guess, as well. So you get to see a lot more insight into the world of the Imperial Guard, as opposed to just the Tanith regiment.
Mm-hmm. I think the only other thing I do want to, I guess, raise a bit more of a Vermilion level before going into the spoils. I want to say it's a story that is not a story of its own. It is instead part of First and Only. It was going to be the 4th Gaunt's Ghosts short story in Inferno, and instead of that, it ended up becoming part of First and Only when Abnett was commissioned to write that book. So it is an interesting sort of look at, this is what the story was going to be before it became part of First and Only.
Yeah, and I remember you hinting to me that there are some subtle differences, which I am sure you can point out, because honestly, I didn't notice anything in my skim through.
Yeah, it does. I remember, I think Black Library says something like, this is a look at what could have been different. And it's not really different in that way. Yeah, all right. We'll get to that.
All right.
Do we want to go into spoilers now then?
It sounds like we can. Are we going to start at the beginning then with the first short story?
Yes. Let's do that. Alright, so our first story is A Ghost Return. This is set before Gaunt takes charge of the Tanith, when he's with Hurricane 8th. I think that's how you pronounce that, Hurricane. Does anyone want to go over the plot of that one?
Well, it's very brief. I mean, it's a very, very short thing.
Yes.
Gaunt and a squad of troops are sent to escort a archaeological expedition.
They're sent to rescue an archaeologist.
And they discover that the archaeological expedition is actually almost about to unleash a demon. But Gaunt's gut instinct, something that comes up a lot more in many later books, kicks in and saves the day.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one, because they sort of say that his gut instinct, even in the book, they acknowledge that his gut instinct is incredibly unreliable. And then they go with it anyway, and he turns out to be right.
Was it unreliable? I don't remember them commenting on that.
The interesting thing about A Ghost Return is it was published in 2014, over a decade after First and Only, and you can tell, because Dan Abnett does not stand still as an author. You can clearly tell that his way of language, the way he's written it, the way he's structured it, is that he's had a lot more experience under his belt, because going from A Ghost Return to First and Only feels like a downgrade.
Huh. So, I don't know if I felt that way with A Ghost Return, but I did feel like I noticed it a lot more with Of Their Lives. We'll get to that. But I think that's maybe just because A Ghost Return was so short.
I kind of went backwards. In that, so I didn't really notice it like a downgrade, as you said, but like the story of A Ghost Returns, as you said, is very succinct. It kind of goes start, plot, everything happens, just closes out very, very rapidly.
Yep. I want to make 2 comments on that. Or I guess one comment, which is you've told it the way things actually happened, but as we read it, we don't learn those things until they happen. So we know they're underground, we don't know why they're there. And then they find a dig team. It's like, they're there to help the dig team. I think they're called like a survey team and a dig team. They're called both, something like that.
Yeah, so they're looking for archaeological remnants of the saint, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the interesting things really does double down on the importance of Saint Sabbat, which, again, is not something you find in First and Only, or Ghostmaker, or Necropolis. That's something that comes up in the Saint arc.
Well...
So it does come up in Necropolis a lot.
Saint Sabbat's not that important in Necropolis, at least not from what I remember.
I don't remember it in Necropolis, but I do remember it in First and Only, because they mentioned that the Saint is how they dragged Slado back into the war. The other thing I wanted to mention on A Ghost Return is that it is in fact, they don't just find a demon, they find a shrine, and they think, we have to help the dig team uncover the shrine. And as you mentioned, Gaunt's gut instincts help them figure out, something ain't right here. He tries to get them to check and say, we'll do something more thorough before we blast this. And him making that call leads them to discover, oh wait, the artillery isn't firing anymore. Where's that rumbling coming from? Oh shit. So they end up finding out what's going on there, as the cultists open fire on them, and they stop the cultists and save the day. But there's also a poignant note about, the shrine. There is still a shrine. It's just not buried away. The shrine is the plug that is keeping that demon contained.
Well, the shrine is the messages to the Astartes who were the ones who sealed the actual plug, right? So I guess there's an interesting aspect there in you mentioned how they find out that the artillery stopped, and that the rumbles they're hearing is not the artillery.
Yeah, and I mean, left with a claustrophobic feel before that. Almost.
Yes, so he does go over and over and over how claustrophobic it is. He talks about the rumbling dirt, the dirt like sliding down the walls. He goes into so much detail. Abnett does this a lot at like the beginning of stories. I often find like similar with First and Only, he will describe so much detail at the beginning of the book. and then you kind of are left to sort of run on with that. Like you just imagine that is everywhere because he's already been through that. But the actual description, the actual conflict that happens, I would argue, is less than the gunfight. The gunfight is like an afterthought. The gunfight is just the conclusion. The actual conflict is really the authority between the commissar and the captain, right, of the actual guard squad.
Yeah.
And Gaunt coming into realization of his actual authority as a commissar. And actually they leave on this really poignant line, which is like, maybe one day I will have a major that agrees with me more than you.
Yeah,
the major says
you'll
that.
have a major who will show you proper respect. We'll get to that.
Maybe one day.
One other thing I wanted to note here for Space Marine chapter there, the Iron Snakes. They are Abnett's own OC chapter, I think. He's written other books about them, who take part in the Sabbath Worlds Crusade. So that's
so which Horus Heresy chapter would they map to?
I think Iron Snakes are an Ultramarine successor. That's a safe bet.
Ultramarines.
I mean, Ultramarines, most successor chapters over him are from Ultramarines.
Okay, so...
Jinvus?
Interesting.
Is that one known?
Oh, fuck's sakes.
Oh, you...
I wrote Iron Saints, not Iron Snakes.
Oh, it is the Iron Snakes.
The Iron Snakes aren't even a chapter. Yeah, Ultramarines Descent. They're Greek-themed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So it's not the first time he's written about them, but it's probably the first time you've been exposed to them, Abraham.
Yes, I haven't seen them. I just assumed, obviously, they're just a chapter. I don't think it was specifically relevant. Was it that? Nope. Was it specific that?
Not at all.
No reason.
Just an interesting note.
Particular. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is, to clarify, then there is definitely a suggestion in the book, specifically from the book, that from Gaunt himself. Actually, I think that Gaunt's gut hunches are not always reliable. He says, they've been questionable in the past or something like that. Something along those lines.
He expresses a sort of I don't think he says something like that, but I think he does express his reluctance to just follow a gut feel, even if the gut feel pays off.
Yeah, I'm sure I remember something specific like that, though, which then makes it kind of, because it made it even more interesting that he then is willing to sacrifice or potentially sacrifice his career to override the major, to go with it. You sort of get the idea. It gives an impression of Gaunt and his character and his determination. If he feels like something is wrong, so he said, "See something, say something." Right? You
say that, but commissars do basically especially I think in more modern law, they can basically do whatever the hell they want.
He says himself. He specifically says that it would be the end of his career if he overrides the major and the evidence doesn't stand up. He says that in the book.
Yeah, you're right. He does say something to that effect, which is a bit weird given what I just said. Because
and given the fact that
he's able to just say,
I thought he was made.
That's the idea.
So when his mentor dies, right, and makes him makes him an officer as well as a commissar.
So what
rank is he given?
Oktar makes him a commissar. Slado, on his deathbed, makes him a colonel as well, which makes him a colonel commissar.
Okay, so is Slado alive during this first one then? In Ghost Returns?
He might be, I think.
He still is.
Is this on?
So that would actually make a lot of sense.
Yeah,
that would make a lot of sense because that would mean that he doesn't have a rank. He doesn't have an officer rank at that time. He's just a commissar.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
I thought this was after. No, this was after he's a commissar because he's already had the duel. He's already had the duel with Dirceus at this point.
I don't think he has.
Because that's when he mentions. That's when they talk about the fact that his gut instinct. He says something about his gut instinct leading to a giant gash across his stomach given to him by Dirceus years before. So this is years after, apparently.
That doesn't feel familiar to me, but okay.
All right, maybe I'm mistaken there. Maybe I'm confused with something else. But
do we have any other thoughts on A Ghost Return? I guess. I liked it. It was a nice short story. It was quite, you get a feel for Gaunt's thought process as a younger commissar, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I love the I kind of love the world building aspects of Abnett's books. So in general, I thought this was a really good one because this is before he is the confident, assured commissar. So you get to see the interaction with the guard when he isn't the ultimate authority.
Jimbus?
At least within his unit.
Yeah. Jimbus, what about you? Do you have any other thoughts on a Ghost Return?
I got a fair bit of blood out of the stone talking about Ghost Return.
We did.
We're going to hour talking about First and Only, aren't we?
Well, shall we start?
What is the plot of First and Only?
Okay, so the plot of First and Only, we have 2 sets of stories. One is the main narrative, so we see a series of different engagements with Gaunt and his titular ghosts, the Men of Tanith. We see some engagements they go through. Some are more connected more strongly than others, but over the course of the story, we get to see Gaunt's. We see the politics and how they are interacting with some other elements of the Guard, and we have a sinister plot uncovered with a general and a radical inquisitor working with him. The second set of stories we have is looking at events from Gaunt's past, which are like shaping the decisions Gaunt makes in the main narrative. Does that sound like a good description?
Yeah, we see him entering the orphanage, right? And we see that beginning bit.
First and Only is quite episodic as far as a book goes.
Yeah, that's a good description of it. They're not unconnected, but it's definitely like different episodes of this arc of his career.
It's also not just a war story, because we have like 2 big sections that there is both behind the lines and on a ship being taken to the next battlefront.
That's true.
Yes, it gives you I feel like it gives a very good overview of the Tanith and of the ghosts and their relationship with Gaunt then as well. Although it is interesting because then when you go into the second book, you're going back in time almost for a lot of the stories.
Yes, it feels that way.
And it was a bit disjointed, I think because of that. But yeah, I think it works okay. I don't know if it is as standalone as you think, but it definitely is relatively standalone at least.
Mm-hmm. I guess as far as if we're talking about plot, we should go into like what the overarching plot is, which is there is a secret message at the highest level clearance, Vermilion. Everybody like gasps at the fact that a Vermilion level message has been found, and the message is being sent to the general about basically a weapon that's been found, something they can weaponize to fight chaos. And the general wants this because, in the general's eyes, this is what's going to let him be like the ultimate authority of this crusade, and he wants that. And the Inquisitor wants this because the Inquisitor wants to. And he's a radical Inquisitor. He believes in fighting chaos with chaos if need be. He is not shying away from the grey area.
No, he's in this the biggest douche Inquisitor I think that I've seen in 40k.
He is comically evil.
I say 40k. I mean like Warhammer 40k, including Horus Heresy. Like he comes across as comically evil, as you said, but no more comically evil than most of the other evil characters in this story.
Yeah, especially some of the later ones as well.
Once you get into Eisenhorn and Ravener, you'll see other Inquisitors who are just as bad.
Oh yes, definitely. But the and it's interesting. I know about those because now I've read Eisenhorn as well. So yes, and Heldin obviously turns up in Eisenhorn trilogy as well.
Well, let's get to that when we get to Eisenhorn.
This is worth bringing up that in First and Only we have the very first mention of Gideon Ravener.
Yes.
Gaunt mentions his book, The Sphere of Loving.
Yes, he does. Which is a name drop, which I'm actually glad I knew about. I noticed.
Some time to come after that, because I'm pretty sure that Abnett was writing the first book. Was that Xenos? I think Xenos was the first book, but we don't see Ravener in Xenos. So this is pretty something he had in his head, but probably wasn't going to write for a good few years down the line.
So that definitely made me wonder about the timeline of when he wrote the books. Because I remember in the past, when we looked at it briefly, I think he wrote some of them alongside the Gaunt Ghost books. He wrote the Eisenhorn books alongside some of them, but I didn't know which ones. And so, yeah, as you said, the mention of Ravener in that scene with the orphanage and the fact that he's read the one of Ravener's books suddenly made me think, so how much of this did he know in advance? And there's actually a lot of aspect to First and Only, where he brings up Abnett has a thing I feel like he has a thing for prophecy, or at least like future telling. So he brings up a lot of prophecy in First and Only, and he throws in a lot of items, like items from Gaunt's past and his history, that makes me wonder how much of that we're going to find out about, because we don't find out about 95% of like the little items from Gaunt's history that he lists at one point. All of these items that Gaunt has on a table when Milo comes in the tent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder how much of those are setting up for future things as well. Obviously, at this point, I don't know, because these are the only 3 Ghost books I've read. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see, I guess, coming into the next few books, whether any of those come back.
If we're talking about that, then when we get to Necropolis, we're going to have a lot to discuss.
Well, I want to finish off the plot thing. It turns out that this secret device is a standard template construct machine, an STC, which is a device in 40k which works differently depending on what era of lore you're looking at, I think. Sometimes this is a machine that, if it works properly, can make everything. And sometimes this is a machine that makes one thing. In this story, it's a thing that makes one thing, and it makes Men of Iron, which are a big deal in the 40k setting.
They're basically Terminators, right?
Kinda, yeah.
They're like the AI rogue enemy of the humans during the age of information, or the age of technology, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They're basically a cross between Skynet and
they're basically Skynet, aren't
Skynet?
Actually, I'll think of it someday.
Ooh,
Skynet
right.
and Hell 9000.
I guess. Although my interpretation was more like I felt like there was definitely a Terminator vibe going on from the descriptions.
Yes. I mean,
I've seen the art of the Men of Iron that were in Black Library Inferno comics at the time. They look like knockoff Terminators.
I will have to dig some of that up and show it off on the screen at this exact moment.
Yeah, that definitely springs true with his descriptions, at least. And the aspect I found quite interesting there as well is that you have these Men of Iron, and they are in this book. They are definitely kind of a horror aspect, especially when we come to what has happened to the construct and the chaos influence that's being like built into the Men of Iron when they're constructed. But this is in a world, mind, where Necrons exist.
Yes, so that is something I wanted to comment on. The description of them feels very reminiscent of Necrons, which I thought was an interesting choice. It has them all like lined up in this like what's basically a tomb for them. They're all just neatly arranged in rows, lined up. If he hadn't he explicitly describes the eyes as being blue. If he had explicitly described them as being green, I would have thought that Abnett was trying to make a connection between Necrons and Men of Iron there.
That would have been very interesting at this time.
And it would have. I mean, it would probably be a different sort of setting we're looking at almost in terms of the background lore of the world. It describes them in a very Necron-like manner. How they're all neatly arranged in rows, and then they start screaming.
Yes, there is some major horror aspects going into that, and it just made me, I guess it made me laugh that anybody in the Imperium thought that this was a good idea. Like,
well,
they get
Well, he means like that the General and the Inquisitor wanted to use these.
Yes, so there's always going to be power-hungry people in the Imperium, sure. Like half of the First and Only book is infighting and politics between like different sections of the Imperial Guard. But the idea that anybody thought, yes, we should turn on this machine that's been corrupted by chaos for thousands and tens of thousands of years.
Well, they didn't know it had
horrifying concept.
They didn't know it had been corrupted by chaos, and when they accidentally turned it on, then they found out. Oh no.
Surely, though, like Gaunt was immediately aware. Like before they turned it on, he says, this is looking bad. This is on a chaos world. What could possibly happen?
Gaunt has the benefit of a prophecy telling him, "Shut that thing down."
Yes, and we'll get to that. We will absolutely get to the fact that he has a prophecy for fucking everything.
He does in this book. Like, but that's the whole point. The secondary story is all about like we see what's guiding his decisions in the main narrative. And we're wondering, like, what's guiding some of them, and it's kind of hinted at, but yeah.
Yes. So I was thinking when you were describing this standard construct, though, this is probably the best example in this book, at least, of the retention of information that you were describing, where Abnett keeps you in the dark until the last moment of what this thing actually is.
Yes.
So going into this, it would be you'd have a lot more time to prepare, to be mentally ready for a Chaos Terminator construction machine. If you'd been told in advance, like his officers had. So not just Gaunt, but like his entire officer cadre, except for Rawn. We are put in the position of Rawn in this story.
That's
Major
true.
Rawn.
I like when you say Chaos Terminator construction facility, because Chaos Terminators are a very different thing.
Well, they were a Chaos Terminators. Are they Obliterators or something? I can't remember.
No. Terminators are Terminators.
Dawn of War.
With Chaos Space Marines.
Oh, yeah. In Dawn of War, they have Obliterators in place of the Loyalist
They're like the
Space Marines
equivalent.
Terminators. Yeah, in actual setting, Obliterators are a slightly different weight category, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. Chaos have Terminators. But yeah, these are Skynet. Chaos Skynet, let's call this. Yeah.
Okay.
Chaos Corrupt.
So do we want to go... We've been through a general plot study now. Should we look at the actual, like, more in a chronological order now? The actual, like, good things we did think we actually went really well.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some things I want to... Not necessarily things that went well, but interesting things to raise. One is just how incredibly evil this Inquisitor is described. Not just with his actions and the way he, like, interacts with people. He's described as having, like, an equine face and things like that specifically to scare people. And at some point, the book describes him as being like a skeletal giant. Like
he's very inhuman. Yes. He doesn't sound like human. To the guards, he is almost like the boogeyman that turns up and it's a disturbing image, definitely.
He just tortures people for no reason.
Well, you say no reason, but like we find out later on.
Some of them for reason, but also for no reason.
Some of them.
Like the guy from the Jantine Patricians. He just is like, oh, you don't like psychers. How about I show you what it's like to be a psyker, and just torments him.
Oh yeah, and I do find it kind of. Go on.
Or the Jantine doctor that he just beheads, like right in there.
Yes. I was just going to say, surely this is an indicator that you are working with the bad guy if he just beheads the chief of your medical staff in front of you. Like this is.
What are you going to do? Interrupt him?
Well,
get your head cut off next?
Well, I mean, Larkin definitely does something about it later on. So.
Well, there's that. I
thought we may be more in a chronological order, though. So yes, I totally agree that the Inquisitor is portrayed very much. I wanted to go over the beginning, though.
Okay, go on.
Because the beginning is so well done, in my opinion, as an introduction. So it starts off, and he's describing the scenery. Right? No, so the right at the beginning is in the trench.
No.
And you
right at the beginning is the fighter pilot scene in space where they pick up the message.
Oh, okay, yeah. But that's like, I thought that was, isn't that joint with like the Vermilion?
Well, that's shared later
now?
On as well, yeah. That's also an interesting point, because this was the first part of First and Only that was written as well. He developed First and Only around this whole plot almost, right? So the first
of the Vermilion message.
Yeah.
That's an interesting. So you're saying that you think the idea of Gaunt and the Ghosts kind of sprung up from this initial seed, then, which was just the intel?
Well, we had 3 stories first, and then the 4th short story of Gaunt's Ghosts was going to be Vermilion level, and then he got asked to make First and Only. So he used,
I see. Yes. Okay, so the book sprung from that.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. So what you can tell from the fact that I guess the Vermilion intelligence is the core feature of the story. It's like the spine of the plot.
Yeah.
Which, well, the Vermilion intelligence turns out to be the standard construct, so that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, I wanted to talk about the bit with when you first introduced to Gaunt and the Ghosts, because it starts off with such a good sort of a good description, I guess, of their situation, which seems very reminiscent of like World War One, especially including gas masks later on, and supposedly incompetent generals who.
I was going to say, this thing trades on every single tired old trope of World War One, down to a general who feels like Melchett from Blackadder 4.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
yes.
I had exactly the same feeling. Some of the characters feel like they were just taken directly from Blackadder. It's quite impressive. But the introduction to the characters as well in that part is particularly good in my opinion. You get to see everybody. He doesn't just dump their entire characteristics. You see them in a specific light that starts to lead towards what you know will become their character later on. So, for example, you see probably the most blunt of all of the interactions is Bragg, who just sort of runs into somebody, knocks them over, and then falls asleep almost immediately. The idea that that's like his character, obviously he gets fleshed out a lot later, and Bragg becomes one of my favorite characters. But that is probably the most blunt introduction of a character's traits, all the way up to Gaunt, I guess, and the idea that Gaunt is different as a commanding officer. He gets Capran to sit down with him and gives him his officer rations, even though Capran is almost a nobody, I guess, at that point to Gaunt.
Yeah, he's just a trooper,
but who comes up quite a lot.
Yeah.
in the stories.
Capran becomes kind of like our look at a average trooper, but also he's got qualities of his own as well. But he's the way we see what does a trooper go through.
Yes, and I was quite pleased to see him turn up in the second short story as well. Mm-hmm. It was quite interesting because that second short story was actually in a really strange position, but it did a really good job, I think, of bridging what I felt like there was quite a strong divide between what we were seeing in the short stories breakup of the second book of Ghostmaker and then First and Only, where Gaunt is well and truly part of the ghosts, and the ghosts to a man almost respect him, to a high degree. And the short stories are all right at the beginning when nobody likes him, nobody cares, and everyone, and like lots of them hate him. And then that short story sort of fits in the middle, which I thought was quite good, because the first read through, I obviously didn't read that short story, so it was quite interesting to then have that filled in.
Mm-hmm. And
there is an indication. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say one thing I quite liked in the first trench warfare segment of First and Only was actually the other guard regiment, the Vitrians.
The Vitrian Dragoon.
Yeah,
I got a big Indian vibe from them. They feel like they're based off sort of Indian martial caste.
Huh. I can see it. They're very...
They all had this book, didn't they? They all had the book carried with them.
So that's something. The way they are initially, like, very first impression, you think, oh, well, they seem nice, but they're going to be, like, honourable to the point of stubbornness, aren't they? They're going to be dogmatic. The way they treat their book, they're like, worshipping this book, practically. They're like, we do everything the book says. You immediately think they're going to be dogmatic and stubborn with honour. And then he immediately, like, flies in the face of that expectation because they're keen to listen and adapt. As soon as there's trust, they're very likeable.
Yeah, it's because their book tells them to, though.
Well, it doesn't. The book tells them keep your las guns on max charge at all times. So because then kill them first try. And Gaunt's like,
I'm sure. I thought, wasn't there
not
a
tone this down? And they do.
That is true. Was there not a quote though, that he reads at some point from the book about adapting to different tactics depending on the situation?
I don't recall.
Oh, I thought there was almost like a subtle jab there about the fact that they were more adaptive than you'd expect, but it was because the book was telling them to be adaptive as well. If it's an Art of War though by Sun Tzu, then that's like absolutely, it's absolutely one of the tenets.
Mm-hmm.
Something I was going to mention back to the beginning briefly was that there was already an indication here, or a suggestion, that Milo is psychic or in some way a psyker. So he's the first person who senses an incoming attack, and he somehow knows before anyone else does, and everyone is just like, "Oh, he's done this before. It's normal." And God doesn't react to this at all.
It describes it in a very suspicious way. Gaunt isn't surprised, and you think he knows something's up.
Yes, it's like everybody knows that this is the case, and from our perspective, Milo seems almost preternatural. Like it seems like he's got some sort of some predictive capabilities there that would not be normal.
They explicitly state that he is psychic in any way.
No.
Oh no, it's always left in a grey area.
Yes, it's left like an open secret that you're a part of.
Yes. And there are plenty of cases in these books where somebody could have told for sure that he was psychic or not, but they choose not to for reasons, which we'll get to later.
We'll get to in Ghostmaker, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought that beginning was great. The character introductions were awesome. It was sorry, go on.
One other thing in that first section as well, I want to point out. They fight a pair of Iron Warriors, and in some books with non-Space Marine protagonists, including Ghostmaker, we see Chaos Space Marines die comically easily. Here they kill a pair of Iron Warriors, but they don't go down easily, and they take a heavy toll on them as they take them out.
That's the thing I was going to say, is like you really do get the impression of a regular Chaos Marine being a Titan, because I think one single Marine kills an entire squad on his own before they bring him down.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you say Ghostmaker. I don't feel like Ghostmaker describes the World Eaters as dying particularly easily. There are only like 6 or 7 or 8 of them, some small handful of World Eaters.
Only 7 World Eaters.
Yeah, but one of them is described as chopping up a tank like it's nothing.
True.
And then like several of them are almost tanks in their own right.
Shall we save that one for Ghostmaker?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can say that, but like I don't feel like that was easy. It's not like Kyphus Cain level of dueling World Eater.
I forgot you've read those
Chaos
at some
Marine.
point. That was years ago.
I have read Kyphus Cain. I forgot. I almost don't count them as 40k.
Well,
Kyphus Cain someday.
Yes, we'll get to that. All right. Do you have anything else in mind from this segment?
So I wrote down in my notes, right? Trooper Clay is dead. Now, this is not interesting in its own right, but the reason I wrote this down is interesting, and that is because this happens after a lot of the stories from Ghostmaker in First and Only. So I was wondering how many of the people that we see in First and Only are actually that die in First and Only are in Ghostmaker.
I'm going to... You know what? I think that is one to cover when we get to Ghostmaker. Because I have some comments on the chronology when we get to Ghostmaker.
Yes. But in this case, at least, the point was Trooper Clay is not in anything else. He doesn't exist. He's not relevant.
No.
He was just a random redshirt to die.
He is a name that was made up so they could put a name to someone who died. Yes.
Yes. I do like all of the shoehorning that Abnett goes through to specifically make it more and more like World War One. Like the fact that, the Chaos, obviously they're going to use gas attacks, obviously. 40k doesn't have technology above where we are right now, apparently, in almost every case that comes up in the Gaunt's Ghost books.
Except for Chaos Sorcery.
Except for space. except for magic and space travel. But other than that, they seem to be. It's almost like a
and laser guns.
Yeah, it was like a Firefly almost interpretation though of the future.
Yeah.
Where you have cowboys in space. Well, in this case, we have World War One soldiers with las guns. But other than that, they still eat rations that are shit. They still have absolutely terrible artillery. They still have like terrible communications technology that's like constantly interrupted by the weakest of storms. They run actual physical cabling out to everything because they can't trust their Vox. It's amazing. Like the level of technology unadvancement, I guess, that the 40k world is experienced over hours is impressive.
What's the tagline again? Forget the promise of science and advancement, for much is lost, never to be remembered. Something like that.
Well, get that one out the window after a point.
I think so, yeah. I think...
Okay.
Thank you, Belisarius Call.
Oh, yeah. Modern law definitely scraps that bit of a tagline a bit. But we'll get to that one day.
I mean, that's the weird thing, because I remember from Horus Heresy that the Mechanicus books, I mean, anytime there's a Mechanicus in it, they are the pinnacle of technology. Like, they have absolutely incredible technology, and none of that seems to have transferred to anywhere near the front lines, or anywhere near the actual conflict in 40k at least, if any of that still exists, of course. Well,
the Mechanicus, the Abnett have got good technology in 40k, but they have like their own interactions with it, and they kind of hoard it. They hoard it a bit.
Yeah.
So that is a theme.
So I guess we can pass on to where we first meet the generals, who are the sort of the beginning antagonists of the story. They are, as you said, Jim, kind of like the comical Blackadder goes forth kind of kind of World War One generals.
That's a very good description of General Drevere.
The Gentine Patriarchs?
Jantine Patricians. Yeah.
Yeah, the Patricians. The Patriarchs would probably fit just as well into that, I guess.
Here's the weird thing. Gentines kind of almost blend in with Volpone, who we see several books later.
Yes.
They play the exact same role.
Well, they do.
Yeah, I very much feel like they fill in for that. They fill in for the antagonist that got killed.
I have comments on this that I will raise at a later point when you least expect it.
So something worth mentioning on the case of these generals, though. So Abnett makes an absolute explicit attempt, in my opinion, to counter them to Gaunt. So we see Gaunt. He's sitting there. He's professional looking. He's very professional in behavior as well, and he's very generous. He shares his rations with just a common guy, a common soldier who walks into his office just to talk to him. It wasn't like he was there for a reason. He wasn't there for a meeting. He just turns up. And he's like, sure.
Can I guess your comparison point here? Your comparison point here is the general having like, oh, I need a new mug of this. My last one went cold, and he's got the whole thing he's just going to throw out.
Yes, he has an entire jug of coffee that apparently could feed an entire regiment for like a week or something, it's described as. And it just goes cold, so he has a replacement brought to him.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And also, it's worth noting as well that all of the, at least at this part in the story, all of the bad guys, all of the antagonist characters are described as being either ugly or disgusting looking in some way. The general is described as having disgusting mannerisms. He's like does some weird shit with his teeth that immediately puts even his subordinate, who's his friend, kind of. He's this like comrade in being an asshole in this part of the story. Even he's annoyed by this.
Yeah, you get the feeling that the Jantine, is it a colonel in the Jantine? Well, like the lead, like not a general Jantine guy, is very he's tolerating a lot, and you're left wondering, like you kind of just go, okay, sure, whatever, until you get to the end and you go, when you when it's revealed he has a personal reason for this hatred, that he's happy to go along with all this because of that.
Yes, it's also kind of interesting that he sort of, we're introduced to that character not showing his like acts or his acts of kindness or his in any like specific like good light. We're just given the like almost a list of accomplishments, kind of from his perspective. It's like the things that he has done, and the Jantine too. But like specifically, we're given like almost a rundown of his military record.
So it almost sense. Are you talking about Drevere there? Who are you talking about?
No, not Drevere. I'm talking about the guy with another F name. Like dozens of them, like there's dozens of people with just an F name that always blurs into the same thing for me.
Is this Ferraid, the contact?
Who's the second in command, Drevere? The guy who is in the room with him.
That's the Jantine guy. God, I can't remember the Jantine guy's name.
I know, right? I'm sure it begins with an F again.
Prepared for this, shouldn't we? We should have a list of names.
Oh, I have a lot of names. I just don't have that one. I feel bad for him.
He's almost like generic antagonist number one. Like
he's the dragon up. Almost. He's the top henchman who has to put up with all the shit from the guy at the top.
Yeah, it is. It's a very Dr. Evil talk as well. Like they're discussing the fact that who are these poor, ragged,
who are those ants
looking?
There's also
who are these ants? Yeah, he specifically says that. Who are these ants that are fighting on the front line today?
We're getting very bogged down in this early section.
We are. But I feel like the Abnett does that so well in bringing everything in.
One thing I wanted to raise was that this book has really high stakes for a 40k book. There are two things here. We've got one, Men of Iron STC. That in itself is high stakes, right?
Yes. Yeah, that seems high stakes from my perspective, at least.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I don't have much of the background, but to me, surely if the age of war between, or the age of technology where they fought, the end of that, the cataclysm, as far as I know, was the fight against the Men of Iron, right?
Yes, kind of. That's close enough. Yeah.
Episodes were quite in Men of Iron, given that many books later, he comes back to the subject.
Does he? You know what?
He does. Horus Heresy, when old Pius is jumping through time.
Yes. That makes sense. I remember that now. Yeah.
He goes into a fair bit of detail about just how utterly horrifying Men of Iron were there.
Yes.
Will you have...
That's one of the high stakes. The other
that seems very high.
The other high stakes thing is the Inquisitor's overall goals. Because his goal isn't just we want to beat Chaos with the Men of Iron. His goal is we want to win this crusade with the Men of Iron, come back and say, look, it worked. His goal is literally to shift the Imperium from a path of white to a path of grey, in his own words.
Yeah, I think I know the scene you're talking about as well.
That is that is lofty aspirations to shift the mentality enforced by the ecclesiarchy and the entire Imperium.
Yeah, to go from the
Also,
I guess it's for their own safety at that point.
The implication that the Imperium, as it is too clean and pure as well.
Yes, and it's interesting because that always frustrated me as well in the Horus Heresy books, and then knowing what I did about the 40k world from the games, it always frustrated me that the Imperium was as cut and dry about technologies and psychic powers that they seem to use carefully under a lot of guidance. You could say maybe sometimes. They seem to use these powers, but very, very sparsely, and they are cut and dry about the warp and stuff like that, and technology specifically, and that always frustrated me. But as you said there, he wants to go more grey about this, and that is obviously a bad thing from the perspective of the plot, because that means things like Men of Iron.
We get to see
the use of technologies.
We get to see what a grey Imperium would actually look like a little bit, and you go, "Oh, that's kind of scary." That's even scarier.
Exactly. I used to look at it, and I used to be like, "Well, surely some technological advancement would be good." This seems extremely prohibitive. But then again, you're talking about what happened. Like the Men of Iron, I guess they were the cataclysm that happened to a far more advanced humanity than you see in 40k.
Mm-hmm.
So what would the 40k humanity have to what would they stand a chance against that?
No.
Well, exactly.
Let
alone Chaos Terminators, of course.
Do we have any comments we want to make about the middle segments where they're on the planet in downtime and when they are on the ship?
I like the ship. I like the ship scene a lot. It was interesting to see the Mechanicum turn up, because that was a Mechanicum ship, right?
Yes.
Kiss.
That ship.
And it has the captain who is described as this bloated narcissistic thing who they part of their plan is literally to argue in front of him to distract him so he's not observing everything happening on their ship.
Yeah, well, Gaunt walks all over that guy. I found that scene really interesting because either Gaunt is a tactical genius, which he is shown to be at least pretty damn good in some of the other scenes, but he goes into that with prior knowledge of the captain, maybe? I'm not sure, because he seems to play that in the perfect way, which I feel like would not have turned out with any other person, maybe. The way he walks over the captain seems highly tailored to that guy specifically.
He plans in advance how, not necessarily what we see them plan when he just fucking punches the Vitrian guy. It isn't how they're going to have the conversation. We see how they're going to, the reason he punched him was not because they were going to have a conversation about him having punched him. It was to lead into the conversation they wanted to have to distract him, to make their demands. It almost reminds me a little bit of in The Hobbit, when Gandalf leads the hobbits in 2x2. No, sorry, the hobbit and the dwarves in 2x2 to Bjorn. The plan we see isn't how they're going to have that conversation. It's how do we open it? How do we
I don't remember that in a movie.
let's don't disappoint me.
Maybe. I think what I felt was a bit tailored to that guy specifically was just the fact that Gaunt just almost explicitly just keeps demanding what he wants the guy to do, and the guy out of sheer Yeah, but it's just because he's like, I think it's partly Mechanicum based, like the fact that he doesn't like humans, he doesn't want to interact with humans. He is the ship. He wants to be the ship.
Mhm.
And the fact that these people are talking to him, he's just like, please just leave me alone. I'll just do whatever you want. Just get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
He does it almost out of like a just exacerbation, I guess.
Yes.
No, what's the
Exacerbation.
Yeah, he's just very he's very tired with humans. I think it feels like that wouldn't have worked.
I got an impression of him being angry and Gaunt pushing his luck, but it works out.
There is a bit of that at the end, yeah, I think. But like the first few requests, he's just like, I demand you.
What are you gonna do about it?
I think I just immediately like shut down the ship. We'll do it. He does it immediately. Just immediately does what Gaunt says, and I was just kind of amazed by that.
He immediately gives him the access to a medical room to deal with some shit, and then he's like, "Look, something's going on. I need to stop paying attention to you two assholes." Yeah, that whole thing was. We also see, you mentioned before about what Larkin does to Haldane. It's like,
oh yeah, shoots him with an old-fashioned rifle. It's almost described as like being like a Garand or something like that.
Action. It's literally mentioned as a bolt action.
Yeah.
So it's literally a World War I type weapon.
Yeah, well, not necessarily World War I. They still use bolt actions today, obviously, but it does describe from the wooden aspect, I think, as well. It did sound like that. I definitely got that vibe as well, Jim.
Yeah, I don't know guns that well, sorry.
I know them incredibly well. And a old wooden bolt action rifle basically sounds like a Lee Enfield or something you would have seen in the trenches.
And it's like a trophy weapon, because they've got trophy weapons rather than actual guard issue weapons, right?
Yes, because they weren't allowed to bring weapons onto the ship. They were only allowed, and they shouldn't even have had that, because that counted as a weapon that they shouldn't have had. But it does make me wonder, like, so the weapons in the 40k world, the ones that I know of, you have the las guns, the regular las guns. You got a las pistol, you got a las rifle.
Yeah.
So you have bolters as well. You have the bolt pistol and the bolt. Assault rifle, I guess.
There are solid shot munition guns, if that's what you mean.
Well,
I was wondering.
Yes.
I was wondering, you have guns like this. So if you have these like old trophy guns, does that mean they retrofitted one of these guns to take bolts, or does it mean that they somehow get ammo for these guns? I was just interested into
it's just a solid shotgun. Solid shotguns, munitions do exist. You've got auto guns, you've got stubbers, you've got things like that. It's not firing. I don't think it's firing bolts. It's not like a bolt gun.
Yeah, no, that would be
it's
insane.
Not a bolt gun Lee Enfield.
Haldane's head would have exploded. That would.
Well, he basically did explode his neck.
Gone. Yeah, well, it definitely cut his neck off or something. Yeah, I do wonder as well. The medical technology. They seem to have amazing medical technology in some aspects. Like they had some sort of stasis field that was keeping him alive somehow.
Yes.
And yet they couldn't just do that indefinitely, even though it was just a neck damage. It wasn't like he took a shot to the head or like his brain was exploded or something. Or
don't worry about it. Things need to happen. He needs to be conscious and he needs to be dying for the plot.
I guess. We will get to. So throughout this entire book series, Abnett does one thing that kind of frustrates me a lot. Is he will think of a scene, and this is how I imagine him writing the book. He will think of a scene, and he'll be like, "That would be amazing. That would be cool. I want to have that scene." He will write the scene. The scene will have happened already, like in on paper probably, and then he will think, "How do I make this make sense? How does this fit into the world?" And then he will have a character say something or something happen that will then justify why the scene happened that way. There are so many examples of that in Ghostmaker. I can point out at least two. I think I wrote down in my notes. Yeah, there's two I wrote down in my notes for Ghostmaker alone.
Okay. Yeah. One thing, I guess.
It's only for nearly an hour.
That's fine. We'll be done soon. I've got another thing. I guess this maybe steps back to when they were on the planet. They had the downtime, and we get to see Corbeck being very like. I did like that scene of Corbeck and Rawn where Corbeck is actually like, you know what, I'm the Colonel, but you know I can have a good time with you guys. I'm still a ghost. I liked that whole.
You've talking about the car chase.
Yes, where they're like, well, what are we going to do? Here's 3 of us from one of the best stealth regiments in the Guard, and we're all in this dark warehouse together.
With the Mafia chasing us.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah, that was a hilarious juxtaposition between
Between that and more serious
you jumped.
things.
Yeah, you jumped from the serious spy drama going on with Gaunt, just straight into
what the rest of them up to.
Yeah, just a car chase between Korvac and Ron and the Mafia, and was it Ron's sort of sidekick?
Yeah, his adjutant.
We haven't actually talked about Rawn yet, and he's a really big part of all these stories.
He is. I think we're going to have a lot of talking about him in Ghostmaker. But Rawn, okay. Until we get to Ghostmaker, it's probably enough to say it is very clear throughout this entire book that Rawn hates Gaunt, and Gaunt doesn't trust Rawn as much as he trusts the rest. I think that is... you know what? Actually, there is a point about Rawn here that's important, and it's going to lead off the back of my next thing. We had Ferraid, his contact. So the spy drama kind of kicks off properly on that planet, where he gets the message from Ferraid. And this leads into stuff later on, where he meets up with Ferraid, and Ferraid is the contact who is working against... He's the War Master Makarov's spy ring contact who is working against Dravir's spy ring. And he's aware of the message that's been intercepted. He's like Gaunt's like touchstone on this, like how he's brought into the fold, and he's in this guy's confidence for the whole thing. And that kind of ends up going interesting with Rawn. I have a question for you, Obrum.
Yes.
Rawn gets put under a knife.
Yes, he does.
Rawn gets, partially experimented on, and we find out there's a pawn next to Gaunt the whole time.
Yes.
And then
yes, we do.
He starts talking about manipulating his pawn, and Rawn is, struggling against these visions and this influence.
Yes, he is.
Did you see the twist coming?
It was almost so obvious that I've not seen it coming. That was the problem.
Ferraid was acting too suspicious.
Well, it wasn't that. It was the fact that they were pushing Rawn so hard. This is one of the other things that I noticed Abnett does quite a few times as well, is if there is a twist coming, he will
misdirect.
Make absolutely obvious that you do not miss the misdirect. You will notice the misdirect coming a mile away because you have to see the misdirect. He sets it up so explicitly. So in the case of Rawn, as you said there, Rawn gets kidnapped by Haldane on the ship. He gets experimented on to a point. We then find out that part of the psychic possession thing, which was interesting because I didn't know anything about that before, but weirdly I'd accidentally seen it in a short story of Ragnar. What's the Ravener? Yeah, Ravener. One of the Ravener short stories. He just pulls off a psychic possession, which I didn't know was a thing. But Haldane then sets up that to do this psychic possession, he has to have used his scalpel on someone for a while. And I was like, oh shit, Rawn has had the scalpel. If we know that, it's almost like he's setting up for this. I'm like, oh, this is being very laid out in a very solid plan here. And then all of the too obvious stuff comes, which is that Haldane looks into the mirror. He tries to do his psychic possession, and Rawn struggles against an image of Haldane, literally in the next line. It cuts to the next line and they switch perspective.
So
and I was like, this is too obvious.
You've been very uncharitable here. This could have been just for dramatic tension, with you wondering how is it going to manifest, not is it going to happen. Of course,
it could have been.
It doesn't happen.
It could have been, but as you said, the other guy...
He started acting too suspicious. Ferraid. Well, Ferraid had my suspicion just from the fact that he seemed... too keen on the machine.
Yeah, he seemed too keen on the machines. But I think at this point, I'm not sure, did we know that it was a machine? Did we know what it was yet?
Once he learned what it was, the second he learned what it was, and we learned a bit about it as well, he starts acting really suspicious once we know it. I think... In fact, once we see him learn what it is, we don't know yet immediately, but when we see him learn what it is, he starts acting like, oh, this is a weapon. And Gaunt's like, I don't know.
I think we find out at the same time as he does, kind of, yeah.
We found out shortly after, I think.
It's actually, don't we find out from Gaunt explaining? Isn't that
the first thing that happens is Ferraid goes, let me see that, and Gaunt goes, should I show him my tablet and give him this information? Of course I should.
Yes.
And he gives him the tablet, and he reads the tablet. That's when he learns.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that was kind of funny because we kept cutting back to Gaunt's inner monologue of, do I tell him? Hey, he's Ferret though.
And
He's my friend.
McCall also has a dodgy vibe.
It was more than the suspicion. It wasn't even just the suspicion about like Ferret acting suspiciously. It was the weird way that Gaunt was acting about it was what was giving it away.
There was a lot there.
Like from Gaunt's perspective, from the reader's perspective, sorry, does it seem like Gaunt should not trust this guy?
It seems like we see Gaunt feeling like he shouldn't, even though we feel like he should initially.
Yes.
And we start to feel more and more like we shouldn't, while also, I wasn't sure how you would feel about that, because I read this ages ago, so it wasn't a surprise for me. But I was wondering, I thought maybe it's an obvious twist, or maybe it feels like actually multiple things are going to kick off at once, and we get to see how. I'm not sure how it felt from your end there.
Yeah, I think you were right though, and actually, I was probably just lucky because I didn't come to the same conclusion that you did there, which was that. Sorry, what did you say? That we would just how was Ron going to manifest the possession? I just came to the conclusion that it can't possibly be Ron. That would be way too convenient. Like Ron is the guy that we know hates Commissar Gaunt. Like, it would be way too convenient if he's just like possessed by Helgane and gets a chance to have an actual fight with him. I was like, just looking at this like, nah, that can't possibly be the case. Surely.
Yeah.
He's also the only guy that doesn't know. He's the only one of the officers that doesn't know what the Vermilion intelligence is.
Yes.
He doesn't know it's the SCC.
Yeah.
So, from Heldane's perspective, sorry, was his name Helgane or Heldane? Heldane. For Heldane, like if he'd got hold of Gaunt and Gaunt had known, if he'd had hold of any other officer, then he'd have known what it was, and he'd have had more information to go on, I guess.
Yeah, that's true.
So meanwhile, while all of this is happening in the thing, I just there's a great scene I thought where the ghosts finally get to fight the Jantine. The Jantine, who've been building up as these like antagonist like group battalion, they finally get to fight the ghosts, and the ghosts. Well, they do all die. There's like a small number of them. There's like 50 or something ghosts. They do all die, but they do a lot of damage to the Jantine.
The sergeant who
it's
dies.
Cathartic.
Was it like Blaine or something, or I can't remember his name.
He's a red shirt. Like it was
one
of the officer card.
He's one of the ones who's described as he was a really fine ghost, and we'll never see him again. He's kind of like one of those. There's also, I don't know if you picked up on it, but I think there's an implication that Heldane had like spurred them on to be more aggressive. I didn't notice that. Oh wait, there is a bit where he says it describes the guy who gave the order as being like pale faced and like wide eyed after it. And this was the guy who Heldane had been fucking with.
Yeah, there was a scene from the there was something where they say the Jantine officer sounded weird when he gave the order or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it's quite a good scene though, just because we finally got to see the ghosts like bloody the Jantine a bit, and then obviously they then get smashed by the dragoons. The veteran dragoons come in and just sort them out.
And the description of their tactics and their like way of thinking is really satisfying there as well. Like they weren't ready; they were ready for an attack. They were completely unprepared for an attack from behind. They were convex when they should have been concave and things like that. Like we get to see the Vitrian like mindset of here's how we fight war, and this is why we're going to win.
Yes, and also the Jantine tactics beforehand as well, which were kind of interesting. The Jantine were using their artillery to like blow craters in the floor, and all of these feel like actually interesting considerations given the type of warfare that they're engaging in.
Yes, some 40k books you see like a strategy or tactic given, and you're like, that's just dumb. Whereas I don't know. I'm not a military strategist. I don't know if these are smart tactics or not, but the way they're described, they feel it all feels like reasonable different specialties, you know?
Yeah, I guess. I do have to wonder though why if they have artillery that can pinpoint accurate fire right in front of their lines. Why they don't just shoot the ghosts instead with the artillery, instead of throwing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of men into a absolute slaughter, which is what happens.
Because World War One tropes.
Yeah.
Well, they did that in World War One eventually.
Yeah, but this is the best World War One being like a bloody slaughter where men are just sent out to die, lions led by donkeys.
Yes, very, very, very much that. You're absolutely right, but still, it seems kind of funny. So there's a lot of amazing scenes that happen around this area. One of the scenes that I've noted here, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, was the blind guy who they send out to get rid of the minefield.
Yes, Domor. How's it pronounced in the
who
audio?
Turns up later.
Yeah.
I didn't realize the first time I read these books, but on rereading them, he turns up in Ghostmaker.
Yeah.
With bionic eyes.
Yes.
He's no longer blind.
Yeah.
At least at the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
It's quite good. I some of these side characters. This would be an example of like a side character who I'm never sure if he's going to die or not. Like he could have just blown up in that minefield, and it could have happened. It very almost did happen multiple times. But it's an interesting scene because it shows Gaunt's kind of his way with the men, even when it is against their interests at the time.
But it also kind of isn't. He knows his men well enough to know it's not against their interests, because he is actually the best sweeper, and actually it is done by ear.
Yes, but sort of.
He trusts his men enough that when his men say, actually, I'm still the best man for the job, he'll say, all right, do it. Even when Farad's like, no, you're mad. What are you doing?
I have to say, I did kind of side with Farad there, because when they describe, like, Gaunt is describing the scene, and he's like, he picked his way through the winding path that the blind guy had taken through the minefield. I'm just like, what is going on? Not only this, but he's trailing a cable behind him as well, because the minesweeper is attached to a cable. So it was just it was such an amazing scene in so many ways for so many different reasons.
It was really quite something.
Oh my god. So I think that pretty much covers the end of First and Only. Gaunt destroys the standard template construct, is it? STC?
Yep.
Yeah, he destroys the STC. It made sense. It was obviously too dangerous to release on the world.
Yep, and he'd made that decision before we saw it start pumping out Chaos Men of Iron.
Yes.
So his decision was immediately validated.
But also, he'd made that decision before he even knew what it was, because he'd been told to make that decision. So that comes to probably the most fundamental part of, I guess, First and Only specifically over the other books.
Yes.
Is the First and Only's plot is driven by prophecy.
It is. It's driven by, we get to find out all these different things that we saw all along. We get to see prophecy. The whole thing with how did he find the information about how your father died is classified, and then we find out at some point later on he's found out, and we learn all of this comes from that one fateful day with that witch.
Yes, which was also another horror scene.
Yes,
that is described in great detail, in quite somewhat terrifying detail.
Do we have any other thoughts on First and Only?
I think we've pretty much bled it white.
Good. All right. Well, fine-tooth comb and all that. So let's move on to Of Their Lives in the Ruins of Their Cities.